About this just to make it sound more awesome.
Definitely. Well, welcome to the after party, the last after party before Halloween. I was going to say before Easter for some reason. I was like, that is not what's coming up here.
Oh man, I'm so excited. Oh, my volume's up.
Oh yeah, this was mine. There we go.
Okay, here we are.
Here we are.
So sometimes you just need to follow your intuition.
I hear you.
And I have never had this, like, I want to be a witch for Halloween. But this year was like, I am getting a witch hat. Like
an elegant witch hat.
Well, this is the thing. I had it in my mind. I was like, either I'll make it out of construction paper. Ryan today said, I have lots of paper. You could make one. And I was like, okay, that could happen. But then I went to one of those Halloween stores. And I walked.
Was it Spirit of Halloween?
It was Halloween Alley.
Oh, Halloween Alley. I don't know that one.
I don't actually know. But I ran into this and I was like, can you all see it? It's so fabulous. And that's what the tag said. It said elegant witch.
Elegant,
and I was like,
fabulous witch.
I knew in my gut I needed a witch hat this year.
The thing is, with the, I think as I'm looking at the shot, it looks like a huge sombrero. When we look at the middle shot, then you can see the witch's point. But like this one, that one just looks like you got a huge sombrero on. But there you go. Now you can see the witch's hat. And then I came to work.
And it has a ribbon.
Oh, so elegant.
Tassel.
So I forgot to bring a costume. I know. So then I went searching through our cabinets here at the office, and I found the cowboy hat from Stampede.
I mean,
a little handkerchief here.
I think one of the reasons I feel more into, I mean, I've been increasingly into Halloween as I age, oddly enough. I did like it as a kid. Mm-hmm. But I now live in a neighborhood where it's likely I will get trick-or-treaters.
But I mean, this might be the year where you're let down on that.
They're coming out. I feel like they are.
I don't know. We'll see.
You don't think so?
We haven't made our call yet as a family.
Oh, man. I heard a great podcast, and I think it was one of Vox's Today Explained, where someone was like, this is the holiday for the pandemic. Like, you're outside. You can easily social distance.
It's true. It is.
You can be really careful with handing out packaged candy. They don't have to come in your house.
That's a good point. Actually, Michael just said that hat looks like Carmen Sandiego and the witch from Oz. But Carmen Sandiego is exactly it right now. If it didn't have the peak, we could just if I could bring up the song right now. Yeah, there you go. Where in the world is Carmen Sandiego? I remember that show. Good times.
So everyone, should we keep the hats on? Or should we?
No, we can't. I can't keep this hat on the whole time.
It's kind of great. We're going to talk really heartfelt.
All right, fine. Let's do it. We're hats all day.
Let's see what the people say.
Let's see what the people say. If we get comments that are like, take those hats off. You're driving me crazy.
Right, totally. Yeah. Like the shtick is over.
Yeah,
quit it.
We also have new foams on our microphones today.
I'm curious if our sound was good.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it'll be drastically different, but we were having a little microphone pops. Mainly because I get aggressive when I get excited and start talking. So
and I get kind of quiet.
This will help a little bit. So there we go. Do it.
Yes.
All I hear is do it,
yes.
Which I think could be either take the hats off or keep the hats on. Keep the hats on. Right, there we go. Excellent.
You know, one thing somebody said to me years and years ago of like just assessing my personality. Mm-hmm. Someone said, I think your friend Bobby doesn't always take herself so seriously. And I was like, oh, that's so great. Because
that's such a kind comment.
I actually do take myself too seriously.
I take myself way too seriously. So if somebody said that to me, I would like, thank you.
I know.
Thank you.
I mean, so that's what I love about this hat.
All right.
I don't know. I might just keep it on all week. I'll come into work.
Whoa, I don't know about that.
I'll be driving in my car, squish it, get in, let go.
I'll wear it for today. I'll wear it for the week around the office. Every time I come in, I'll hey, tip my hat at people.
I know.
Hello, ma'am. Sir. Every time somebody comes to the door.
But for Halloween, your family typically dresses up in... What's the equivalent to a wish? It's like a spell.
Oh, there you go.
You guys dress up together as
the
like a family
last
costume.
couple of years we have. We did like a Star Wars theme.
Yeah.
My wife dressed up as Princess Leia. I dressed up as a stormtrooper. My son dressed up as Poe.
Yeah. Oh, right.
I think last year might have been the first one.
Oh, okay.
I think before that we were in the stage where Eaton was still into like Paw Patrol. That was the main thing.
Oh man, he's grown up so
I know,
much since
I
his
know.
Paw Patrol days.
So in the Paw Patrol days, we would just like walk along with him and that kind of thing. But then we switched over to Star Wars. So then we were like, okay, let's do the family thing, which it was fun.
That's really fun.
We live in a neighborhood with lots of young families, so there's
Yeah.
lots of people out on a normal year. I don't know
Totally.
about this year, so it's kind of fun to be out on
This
Halloween.
is what's going to happen. I'm going to be so excited, and I'll have my hat on, and I'll just be at the door, and nobody will come.
Kid.
And by the end of the night, I'll
One
just
child.
be eating all these candies by myself, drooling chocolate.
It's all good.
Michael says I should preach with it, and it's not a bad idea.
I might have to veto that one. I don't know. Actually, I don't think I have veto power, but I might have to put my vote in against
Just
it.
try and tell me what to do. All right. Well, but today or this week was kind of a fun week for you because you got a new hobby arrived.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's a new hobby yet. I mean,
Okay,
I'm
have you
thinking
tried
about
Okay,
it. So.
tell the people.
Yeah, I bought a heavy bag for my garage,
Right.
like a punching bag.
Right.
And so it arrived, so I hung it up in my garage.
Yeah.
And anchored it all into the ground. And
Did you give it a hit?
Yeah, I did a couple workouts and stuff.
How'd it feel?
It's fun. Like it's a fun thing. I mean,
Where do you feel it?
Well, okay, so I've hit a bag before, but
Okay.
my technique's not great. But I think part of the reason I know so is because it's my lower back that's really sore. Because when you're trying to punch properly, you're trying to punch with your core instead of swing your arms.
yeah.
And I actually feel it sort of in my core and my back and stuff. So I'm like, okay, well, at least I'm punching properly. But
Okay.
it's kind of fun.
Good. It's good that you feel it in your lower back.
Well, I guess so. So.
Strengthening.
Yeah, and shoulders, because I've been working on keeping my hands up and
Yeah.
doing a workout that way. So
I mean, I've been thinking about since you've been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
That's all you talk about. Just kidding. It's not. Since you've been talking about this heavy bag, I was thinking, well, should I try to get a new
you
hobby
should.
for the
Oh,
winter?
I thought you were going to say a heavy bag. Yes,
Oh,
you should do
no.
that, definitely.
No. No. But I am thinking about it. Like, should I
Pick up a hobby?
Pick up a hobby? And then I honestly, my brain just goes, nothing.
Your partner just got a whole bunch of tools. He's
That's
got a new
true.
hobby.
He has, yeah. It's an old hobby, but now it's like
Yeah, it's
on
all
a
new. What's
level.
old is new, Bobby.
I was thinking of maybe like planning out my garden for the spring. But
Okay.
is that too depressing in the winter just to be thinking about a
Maybe.
garden?
I don't know.
Maybe.
Getting ready.
Yeah.
So that's what I got. Actually, I sent. I have a good friend. I sent him a photo of my garage when I hung it up, and in there I had like a shot. You could see all my tools. You could see this new heavy bag. You could see my motorcycle, and I'm like, this is middle age. I'm like unnecessary tools, a fad hobby, and a
Right.
motorcycle. I am like,
that you ride how many times?
yeah, I
a
am
year?
clearly a 42-year-old man living in Calgary right
Nothing
now.
wrong
But
with 42.
no, it's fine.
42 is great.
So there we go. Oh, cross-country skiing.
Oh, I was thinking about
Yeah,
that.
we were just talking about that as a family.
Right.
But cross-country skiing is a little expensive to get into.
Because you have to buy your gear.
Right, but
Buy your
Rachel and I already have snowshoes, so we're thinking about getting kids snowshoes for our son and getting back into snowshoeing this
I
winter.
like that.
Because Rachel and I did a lot before we had kids, or
Okay.
got kids, or bought kids, whatever we did. We were doing a lot more snowshoeing then, but we haven't since
Okay.
our kids came along. So yeah, we're thinking about getting some like 7-year-old snowshoes for our son.
I like it.
Yeah, and
How do you think Eden will take to it?
He really likes outdoors.
Okay,
so
that's true. You did some snow videos.
We did. He can stay outside in the snow forever.
I love that.
We went sledding. By the way, yeah, check it out on my Facebook page. He's hilarious. Every time I put the camera on, he's like, "Hey guys, this was Eaton. Hit like, put a comment down below, subscribe when you're done."
so
He thinks he's a YouTuber like every time the camera turns on.
Oh gosh, I love it so much.
But he can stay out there forever. Like he will just all day, and I'm like, okay. Like after 20 minutes, I'm like, all right, let's go.
Miracle.
He's like, I need to do 5 more runs. So I think
That's so
I think he'll
good.
be into snowshoeing.
That's good.
Yeah.
You should do it.
I think so.
The witch agrees.
The elegant
Honestly,
witch.
my head is itchy. I don't know if I can keep this up.
I'm actually getting a little warm in this kerchief here. Is that what you call it?
A handkerchief?
Kerchief.
Kerchief?
Yeah, like if you're a Western old man. I don't know. Okay.
Okay,
I'm going to
let's
try
talk
knitting.
about
Nice.
Sunday.
Okay.
Oh, someone's trying knitting.
Yeah, Laura's going to try some knitting out.
Oh,
I think she was
nice.
telling us that actually in the Zoom lounge.
Also,
We were hearing about that.
Andy might have some tips for you, Laura.
Oh yes, on the knitting side. I thought you meant.
Yeah.
I thought you were telling me on the heavy bag. I was like, Andy's into everything. He probably does have some tips for
Andy,
me.
do you have tips?
Yeah, I bet he does.
So good. Okay,
All
well,
right.
let's get into Sunday.
Let's.
Talking about Strange Exchange.
Okay.
Sermon number 7. The question was, you say it, I don't want to.
Who touched me? It is a strange question, though.
Weird. As soon as you said it, you pointed out the fact.
Yeah, like I kind of
joke.
joked about it because, I mean, without any context, it's a very strange question to say.
Yeah.
Our sermon title today is "Who
So
touched me?"
Weird.
You know, so
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, anyways, you could say it. So, do you want to recap any of that, or should we just dive into some of the?
well,
the
I mean,
story?
if people don't know the story, I mean, we talked a lot about the context, but the basic story is a woman comes up, sneaks up behind Jesus, touches the hem of his garment, and somehow is healed through that.
Right.
And then Jesus turns around, he's like, "Who touched me?" The woman says, "I did," and he's like, "All right," and then he goes on with his plans. Like it's a to be fair, it's
Right.
quite an odd little story that's sort of sandwiched in a larger story that Mark is telling there about this man named Jairus.
Right.
So,
what was sort of most intriguing to you about the story right at the start?
well, I mean, I think there was sort of two parts to the story that were interesting to me. One was the background behind the idea of why she's trying to touch Jesus' clothes, like why she's touching the hem of his garment. And we can talk a little bit about that. And then the second was sort of reading it in a socio-rhetorical context. Every time you nod, this thing is just flopping
it's a
around.
big nod.
I'm like, oh, she's
lot of
really into this.
agreement.
She's really into this point I'm making. 'Cause I can see.
I know, I just laugh and it's nodding.
Yeah, exactly. But in the socio-rhetorical context of what Mark is trying to do by juxtaposing these two healing stories together, which I thought was just really fascinating. And I've taught about this before in my career, but maybe not as directly as I did this week.
Yeah, because it seemed like the emphasis was really strong in terms of Jairus and his social position,
Right.
and the woman and the way she's been exploited in her social position.
Yeah.
Of course, I see that in the text, but it seemed like those were really key pieces.
Yeah,
of
I mean that was the piece I was, for this week, whatever. That's the piece I was really kind of fascinated by was Mark as a socio-rhetorical comment about, he's telling stories to make a commentary on social hierarchies and social standing and all that kind of stuff. So that kind of went hard after that.
Right.
So.
Do you want to say anything more about that, like hermeneutic lens, like a socio-rhetorical
Right.
hermeneutic lens?
That's a good question. I think one of the really interesting things about understanding is actually saying, I'm changing my vote.
To the hats.
The hats. Should we take them off here? It's a little much. I'm actually getting pretty warm under this kerchief here.
It's true. That's better.
And it's going to be hard to have a serious conversation here.
Yeah. Ashley, such an influencer.
Yes, I know. Ashley decides. Boo. I like it. But back to hermeneutics.
Yes.
I think one of the really interesting parts here is that question of there's all these different lenses you can read any story through.
Yes.
You can look at it through economics. You can look through it through, a social commentary. You can look at it through, with Mark, one of the things you can look through is sort of the messianic secret lens. One of the things that happens in Mark a lot is Jesus will do things, and then when people are like, oh, you're the Messiah, he's like, whoa, slow down, be quiet, which is a major theme in Mark. And to understand there's sort of all of these different streams that are being woven through different gospels, and then realizing that you can come back to the same story and look at through a slightly different lens gives you new ways to come at things and come at it. A socio-rhetorical lens certainly is not the only one, but I tend to think it's one that's really strong, particularly in the book of Mark.
Yeah.
I think Mark is doing a lot with a very little. He's very efficient. Like he's telling the story very quickly. Yeah. But the stories tend to be set against each other and juxtaposed with each other. We talked about the Gerasene demoniac. Right? Jesus goes across the lake. That's in Mark, where Mark's setting this idea of a man with an unclean spirit who lives on the Gentile side of the Sea of Galilee, who has an unclean spirit named Legion, which is another word for a Roman occupying force. And that legion goes into pigs which are unclean, and then they leave the land that used to be controlled by the Jewish people. I mean, all of this is social commentary that he's weaving through these stories. So maybe it was partly that video that I made earlier in the series. Then coming back to chapter 5, and the first thing you read is Jesus crosses the lake again. And so I already had this lens of what is Mark doing here? What's the commentary that Mark is making on? And then everything just, like, it really seemed to stand out to me in a significant way. So I kind of leaned into that.
Yeah, I liked it.
Yeah.
That's good. I also really enjoyed your language of a healing battery.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I do take that back. You did use like your language around the sensations of licking a battery kind of grossed me out a little bit.
You ever licked a battery, like a 9-volt battery?
No, I mean, I probably did it. I more went to like
There's
an
your
electric fence.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Because I grew up on a farm where we had electric fences. And so we would dare each other to touch the fence with a blade of grass. Anyways, that sort of sensation. But I hadn't really stopped in this story to think, what does it mean that the power
went out of him.
It goes out of him.
Yeah, like that's the phrase, you know.
Yeah, and
he knew that power had gone out of him.
Yeah.
And you're like, what is that all about?
Yeah. And so to just stop and like grab for a metaphor that might be like what those words on the page say. Like, I thought that was quite interesting.
I think the phrase I used was like, you could grab Jesus by his pinky fingers and suck that sweet healing voltage out of him.
I was like, whoa, that's grossing me out.
Imagine that you could just like grab 2 poles of his pinky fingers and be like, the power.
But it was interesting because you then, you constructed a phrase that was like, Jesus sensed God's power move through him, was more your choice. And I thought that was interesting because the verb, I don't remember what it was, but it does seem to be more like go, it leaves, it spreads abroad.
Yeah.
And so we're like, I preferred your definition, but where do you get it?
Well, I think, again, the question I asked is, are we reading here this idea that Jesus involuntarily heals people?
Okay.
I mean, I don't think so. I don't think Jesus is a battery. I don't think you can... I don't think if Jesus was around, you could go to him and get healing whether he wanted to heal you or not.
Well, I think we would know other stories. Like this story, and that's the interesting thing about these stories. Is
every time people bumped up into him in a crowd, they'd be like, ah! I feel so much better.
I didn't even know my eyes were good, and now they're amazing.
People taking off their glasses.
Right. But it's so interesting and kind of wild that all of these healings and miracles and interactions, they all have their like uniqueness to them.
Right.
Like there are sort of like aren't a bunch of repeated, there's no formula to like, first he does this incantation, then he prays in this way with his hands to the heavens, and then he, they're all so
there's
unique.
There's actually commentaries that have used that as the exact logic for it. Like when Jesus spits in the ground and makes mud and rubs it on people's eyes. Some of the commentaries will say, like, what we have here is this distinct decision made by the gospel writers to not turn healing into a formulaic experience.
Right, yeah.
I think partly because they don't want to give the impression that if you say the right words or you do the right things, that's where healing comes from.
Yeah.
Whatever healing is, it's idiosyncratic. And I think that might be part of what is going on with the author here, just choosing language that tries not to create a formula.
Yeah.
I think, when I went back and I read in the Greek, and again, I'd have to look it up as well for the specific verbs, but I agree. In a literal translation, I think the NIV is right. Power go out from him.
Yeah.
I think the intent of it, though, is something more like it's not his power that's being drained away. It's somehow that Jesus has a sense of God moving through him or God healing through him. You get that in the Gospels a lot where Jesus says, look, I can't do anything, my Father. I don't have any power to heal. I can't do these things. It's God working through me. And that whole idea of power going out from him is more like, to me, I read more as like conduit language more than battery language, where it's all stored up.
Right.
And if you touch him in the right way, you get a zap of it.
Yeah, that's helpful, yeah.
And it's moving through. But again, I do think part of what is difficult about the language is I think the writers are trying to move us away from a formulaic understanding of healing. I don't think they want us
Right.
to come away with that.
It's just kind of wild to me that there was that kind of insight,
Yeah.
rather than like, let's make this story really sing. It's like, oh, actually, there's a downside to. It just seems like quite an interesting intention.
Yeah.
Or like foresight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk about the healing in his wings, all that jazz stuff?
Sure, yeah.
We're on the battery piece.
You referenced Malachi and Numbers
and Matthew and Deuteronomy.
Yeah.
There was a lot.
And I read through it again today, and I was like, oh, all right. I don't know the details.
Yeah. It is a tricky section.
Yeah.
Because you're dealing with Hebrew idiom.
Yes.
Or Hebraism.
Right.
That's what we usually call them, but they're idioms. And you get a few of these in the Gospels. It's in the Sermon on the Mount when Jesus says, talks about a good eye and an evil eye. You know, if your eye is the lamp of your body. If you have a good eye, so much better. If you have a bad eye. Part of it is you have to understand that in Hebrew, these are idioms for being generous and stingy.
Right.
It has nothing to do with your eyes.
Right. The language had a restricted vocabulary, and it was very like tactile. Right.
So it's ayin tov and ayin ra'ah, and you find them in the Proverbs, and it's stingy and generous. So what he's saying is your generosity is the light, is the window into who you are. It's the thing that will guide you. It's the lamp that's going to move you through the world. And if you're stingy, you're just going to get worse. If you're generous, you're going to be more generous, and it's going to move you towards Christ. So there's like these little Hebraisms that sort of are buried in the text sometimes.
Yeah, like quite buried sometimes.
And this one is definitely one of those.
Yeah.
Because it works like this. You've got this
Because
prophecy.
what's on the page? The page says in the text we were in.
Yeah.
It says
that she reaches out and touches the hem of his garment.
Hem of his
So
garment. It doesn't say fringe.
It says, what is the phrase? So it's in Greek. I'd have to look if it even says edge.
Oh.
Or just says his clothes.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if it might just say his clothes. But the reference comes from two things. First is the passage in Malachi, which was understood as a prophecy about the Messiah. And it says, when the Messiah comes, he will rise with healing in his wings. And wings is this word kanaf, which means an edge or a fringe.
Okay.
And then in the Torah, there's this command for observant Jews to put fringes on the corners of their garments as a mnemonic device. So when they look down and they see the fringe, they'll remember their commitment to God. Jesus references that in Matthew 23 because he says, look, all these religious leaders, they're so excited about having these huge fringes on their garments because that shows off how righteous they are.
Right.
So you've got people wearing fringes because it shows how they're righteous they are. You've got a passage that says, when the Messiah comes, he will rise with healing in his wings, which is similar idea to an edge or a fringe or a tassel on the edge of it. And so a rumor or a myth kind of develops that when the Messiah comes, there will be healing in the tassels on his garments. Like the Messiah will be so great, he'll be so righteous that if you were just to reach out and touch the tassels on his garment, you would be healed. So most commentators think that's what this woman is counting on.
Right.
And again, whether she actually believes that or not, who knows? Like she's desperate.
Know that, or the writers are saying we're showing you. Through this story.
I think if you understand the story that way, you would have to assume that she has heard that myth.
Okay.
Does she believe it? Like she really thinks that's how it's going to work?
Or she's just desperate.
Or she's desperate. I think that's probably more likely. She's heard this rumor that when the Messiah comes, all you got to do is touch his tassels. Here's Jesus. People are excited about him. Do I really think you just have to touch his tassels? I don't know. Do I really think Jesus is the Messiah? I don't know.
Right.
But what else do I have to lose?
Right.
So she goes for it. So that's the kind of background to the story here. Now, the question then becomes, she touches the garment, she is healed. So what's going on there? Does the Messiah really come with healing in his tassels? Or is Mark framing this as the spark of faith that she has, even to put herself out on a limb to try this last gasp effort? Jesus doesn't even see it. God honors that, sees that moment, and then as it uses Jesus as a conduit to bring this healing to her. And I think that's part of what the writer is saying.
Right.
Is no, there's not actually healing in Jesus tassels.
Yeah.
But God recognizes that faith, even misplaced faith, which is actually something that I wanted to talk about in the sermon and I didn't get to, which I think is a really interesting idea. That even sometimes when our faith is misplaced, when it's sincere, when it's honest, when it's desperate, when all we have left is God, somehow God still honors that in us, which I think is also like a really kind of beautiful idea.
Yeah, like there's something in my own imagination that wants to take some sort of interpretation around her intuition and her, like maybe my own literary joy is to see this woman so desperate and so low that in a desperate sort of shamed place who like I don't know if I fully agree with this but who cares if she knows about the story or doesn't know about the story? Like there's a bigger story happening. I don't know what else I want to say about that, but
I mean I have taught about the story before and taken that angle that she's heard this myth. It's not real. You can't just touch Jesus tassels and get healed. But she has nothing left. She puts her faith in that. She trusts that. And God says, it's good enough. And I actually take a lot of comfort in that because I know a lot of your ideas about God are wrong.
Totally.
But we put our trust in them.
Hilariously wrong.
Yeah, exactly, right? And yet God still honors that.
Right.
Because we put our trust there. And our trust isn't, and this is the key, her trust isn't in the tassels.
Right.
My trust isn't in my doctrine or my theology.
Right.
Her trust is in God. My trust is in God. And the sort of surface level of how I articulate it is, I know it's wrong in some ways. And yet God honors that. God heals me. God welcomes me. God, all those things, expressions in the midst of that.
So I almost want to say, like, no, it's not the tassels, and yes, it is. Like,
exactly.
No, it's
like
not
that.
your doctrine, but yes, it can save you too.
Yes.
Like, as you're forming it and struggling with it and wrestling with it and claiming it, it shouldn't, it's not enough, but it very well could lead to your healing.
And this sort of desperate hope. Like, like, I don't even know if this is it, but I'm gonna throw myself on this and I'm gonna give it a shot and I'm gonna see what's out there.
So in that moment, it is the tassels are.
Yes. I really kind of like that. Maybe that would have been a better sermon. Who knows?
You should have chatted with me.
we should do this first and then the sermon after.
Totally.
So.
That's good. Oh, we got like Bible references thrown around in the chat, which is great. Heart emojis. I'm seeing a lot of dab in the chat. I think that's what the cool kids call
That's my son does all the time. I always dabbing.
Is that what it's called? That's good. That's great. Well, thanks for walking me through those details again, the Hebrew idioms, and that is good. You made this claim that sort of stood out to me on Sunday. You said very definitely, this is what the story is about.
Right.
And I don't know, sometimes it's something about it, I was like, today it is, or like, it was like, this is what the story's about, full stop. Like, I don't, it's not that I just had this sort of sense of like, again, like a yes and no. Like, not that I disagreed with anything that you said, but it was so definite to stand and say, this is what the story's about. Like, when I think about people hearing it, if they haven't read the story in these ways, did they read the story wrong? Was their interpretation of the thing not right and not good enough, or lowly on the...
And there is some of that, right?
Right.
Like we all read things and we miss things. And so there is some element of if you missed this, then you missed the story. You didn't get it right.
Yeah.
At the same level, there is, I like how you said, this is what the story's about today. That is very much sort of what you're doing every time you're preaching.
Totally.
Is you're saying, hey, this is what this thing is talking to us about now in this moment right now.
Because I remember people asking, like, will you ever reuse your sermons? And I remember being like, oh, no. Like, because I, for one thing, don't even remember what I preached 3 months later, let alone, like, would I want to say the same thing?
So maybe you have reused them and you
probably. Who knows? But yeah, I was just curious about, I'm answering my own sort of level of like, why did that stand out to me as I'm asking you, like, oh yes, this was what the story was for the day. But I'm curious about this idea that like, do you think it's ever possible that our own interpretations, as we set these things aside one another and the convenience with which we're able to do that, we're not consulting big scrolls or, we literally have these texts lined up in our Bibles or on our Bible software.
Yeah.
Like, do you ever think that we are sometimes interpreting, like, could have a more like ingenious interpretation than what was intended?
I mean, I think absolutely.
Yeah.
I think what we have to understand is any text. So, I mean, this goes to hermeneutical theory and textual theory. There's an author-centered hermeneutic, which is what does the author have in mind when they write these things down?
Right.
And I think, for Mark as an example, I think Mark very much has social commentary in mind when he's writing these things down. I think the gospel is structured in such a way, and stories are juxtaposed in a certain way to make those points.
And when you think about the presence of empire for Mark, it's just like, how could it not, what he writes, how could it not be informed by that time? It's like writing anything beside a major world empire like we live in. Like we think about and talk about the empire, the empires we're a part of, the empires we sit beside all the time. So that makes sense to me historically.
Yeah, and even like for this example, you start with Jairus, you move to this woman, you end with Jairus. I mean, these are conscious choices that the writer is making. That said, anytime you write anything, including a sermon, as soon as you offer that to a community, there's now also a reader-centered hermeneutic that becomes part of the meaning of that document or that performance.
Right.
So there's what you intended, and there's also what's received, and there's also what's gathered by the audience in it. And that is, and I think this is sometimes difficult for people. That's not a lesser meaning.
Right.
That's a meaning as well.
Right.
Then, when we're talking about biblical texts, there's a canonical meaning, which is, so there's people who read it, and then there's also a community that gathered it together and put it in conversation with other texts.
Right.
So Mark meant something to the author. Mark means something to everyone who reads the text. Mark means something to the community that gathers it and sets it beside Matthew and Luke and says, these together tell us something. And all of those are legitimate meanings in there, which I think is actually one of the really fascinating parts about reading Scripture, which is why you can say things like, this is what the text means today in this moment as we read it together.
Right.
Because this is, when you're sermonizing, it's not a singular thing. It's us as a community interacting with a specific moment in history. Yeah. It's us interacting with a certain way of presenting that text and reading it. Right. Now, we talked about this last week, a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
I don't know, somewhere. You can have bad interpretations that don't honor the authorial intent.
Right.
I think reader-centered hermeneutics that discard what is clearly going on in the mind of the author are not helpful.
Right.
They're manipulative that way.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that readers don't bring something into the conversation as we read it. And I think it's in that interplay back and forth. What is Mark doing? Yeah. How are we reading it? Yeah. How is the church reading it? Right. All of those together bring something really meaningful.
Something really alive.
Yeah, because, as an example here, Mark, is talking about, and we'll talk about honor maybe. Yeah. Mark's talking about certain honor that this man has and this woman has, and how do we compare those two things? I think for us, there's all kinds of examples of that in our world that are very different than Mark's. The things that I had in mind when I was reading were, the Mi'kmaq in Nova Scotia and Nigerian women protesting against SARS right now. All these places where there are groups of people that are not given the social standing to play by the rules and to ask for what they need. Yeah. And they have to go out and they have to grab a hold of it and they have to demand it and they have to protest for it. And it's very easy for those of us in the Jairus position to say, oh, you should wait your turn, or you should do this a different way, or if you had, better manners about it, all these different things that we impose on them. That's clearly not what Mark has in mind, but it's very much what the text means today. But it's that delicate balance of trying to, what is Mark doing? What are we doing? What's happening in our world? How do we bring that all in together? So to original point, when I say this is what it means, that is very much what it means for this community in this moment at this time right now.
I think it's a really helpful asterisk to put on.
Absolutely.
And sort of, check in the footnote about. Let's talk about honor culture, because I feel like it's something that's often below the surface of our reading, but I'm not sure we always bring it up and really look at it from a few different sides. So I kind of wondered if we could have a little, you mentioned Bruce Molina's work, which is really helpful. I have at least one of his books. So if we could talk about what are 5 things that people should know? I like turning it 5
into
about
a little honor culture.
What comes to your mind when you? I mean, it's more fresh in your mind because you wrote the sermon than I did not. But
I think one of the things we have to understand is that we don't live in an honor shame culture.
Right. Yeah. So you just added the other word, an honor shame culture. Right.
Yeah. We live in what do we call it here? I don't know what they call our culture, but merit guilt or something like that. Anyway, we don't live in the same types of honor shame culture. We have social hierarchies, but they tend to be based more around, I'll say this, a myth of meritocracy.
Yeah, yes.
Right? It's not really always meritocracy, but if you have money, if you've got this, you've got that, then you tend to be given more respect, more place of privilege, and more ability to not only communicate what you need, but have that heard and responded to. Honor cultures are a little different, where it's not even sort of predicated on the idea of a sort of meritocracy. There are just hard and fixed lines.
Yes, that's a really helpful distinction.
Exactly, almost like a caste system. Although not, in that Jewish culture, not as strict as we might understand a caste system today. But today, very much, we still have issues with patriarchy. But that's sort of below the surface, right? Nobody would say a man is more important than a woman.
You just feel like you're going crazy. And then someone says, it's the patriarchy. You're like, oh, yes.
So we live with those things. But, maybe to your point, maybe what makes it crazier is that it's under the surface.
That is
in that first century world, it's just that's what it is.
That's
You're a woman.
Really helpful.
You don't have priority here. A man does. Maybe in some ways that's even easier to deal with when it's just at least out in the open and nobody's pretending there's equality sometimes.
They're both shitty.
Yeah, exactly. So you have that. You have certain religious systems. There's the obvious one that we understand about ritually clean and unclean, which blood was part of that. But also sort of the caste within the religious system. Jairus is an archisynagogas. He's a leader in the thing. So there's money, there's sexual status, there's gender, there's religious status. All of these things are systems. And they're very much sort of interlocking systems.
Oh, that's good language.
That tell you who you can interact with and how you interact with them. So as a man who is a day laborer, I understand how I can interact with Jairus, who's a religious leader. As a woman, you understand how you can interact with me, even though I'm just a day laborer. As a woman, it's all of these different layers. And maybe what's, again, less crazy making is the rules were pretty clear and you just followed them. And what happens in this story is this woman is the lowest of the low on that social hierarchy.
So read it with this awareness of an honor shame.
And Jairus is the highest of the high on this.
There's alarm all over it.
Yes. So, and again, we read it with that sort of subtle, oh, woman, man. they're reading it with, oh,
Right.
she should not be doing this.
Right. She is the dirt.
Exactly. Everybody knows.
Yeah.
First of all, she doesn't get to come and talk to Jesus. She certainly doesn't get to interrupt Jairus. She doesn't
Get what she wants.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She waits her turn. And if
Right.
Jesus is done,
Right.
then maybe he will come to her.
Yeah.
So like alarm bells are going off all the time. And we see some of that. We experience that all the time. But here it's like these lines are so clear.
Yeah.
And they all get crossed.
Right.
And the piece to me, that I really keyed in on the sermon and that really stuck out to me is that daughter line.
Yes.
That, again, when we're reading for social commentary, I don't think that is, Jesus actually doesn't call men or women daughter or son very often. It's not like a
Like,
verbal tick.
Hey, man.
Yeah.
What's up, sister?
Exactly. Like, he doesn't do that a lot.
Right.
So the fact that
It's intentional.
we're in love with Jairus.
Yeah.
He's like,
how you
look at
played
this
that
guy
out.
who's like so good and all he wants to do is care for his daughter. Like you almost,
Yeah.
at first you're kind of like, okay,
This is the
here
reversal.
comes.
Yeah. That you started the message with.
Yeah.
Like, we're in a reversal.
Yeah. So here's this guy who
Yeah.
we're like, oh, he's going to be a bad guy.
We're
'cause he's
instantly
all
sympathetic. Well, quickly sympathetic.
Exactly.
Not instantly, but.
But then he wants his daughter. And then
Yeah.
the first thing Jesus says to this woman's daughter. And it's like all of that empathy you have for Jairus,
Right.
he transfers to this woman.
Right.
And
literature.
yeah, like
Sacred literature. When do you get to
purposeful?
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
so beautiful, right?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
you imagine,
Yeah.
and it's. I think it's beautiful from me reading it. But you imagine that first century audience. You imagine people in the audience there, who are like, "Oh, Jesus is going to go to Jairus' home to heal his daughter," and he turns to this woman and he calls her daughter.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I think that's a really beautiful
Yeah.
moment, and it's the moment that I sort of. Keyed in on the sermon that really
Right.
kind of opened my eyes.
Yeah, we're
to
so
it
used to this
week.
story, but our response should be like, "What?
Yes.
Way? Like, no way!"
Yeah.
Which you did with the Sixth Sense reference.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's
was that like, "Oh, no way!"
So here's a question.
Yeah. Okay.
Where do you see, because we were talking about this too, is in a sermon, I'm hesitant to what's the word I'm looking for? I'm hesitant to do too much of the application work.
Right.
So therefore,
I like that
it's
about our
this,
voice here.
Think about this situation. Like I want people to be creative. I want to draw that out of them.
Yeah.
But in this context, like when we talk about that inversion of social hierarchy, where do you see that happening in the world around us today? That piece where someone doesn't have their voice heard, and we keep telling them, do it our way, play by the rules. If you keep doing this, eventually you're going to get heard, and and if we're honest, it's just never going to happen.
Right. I mean, I think about domestic violence. I think about. I mean, we
interesting.
talked about that more when the pandemic started. I haven't heard much sort of in the.
Yeah, you brought it up in the How to Be Angry series. You talked about it.
Oh, did I? Don't remember.
It was quite good. If you missed it, go back to How to Be Angry. I think it was the first or the second week in those two sermons you brought it up, and it was quite powerful, particularly at that sort of entry into COVID.
Yeah.
But that's it.
Yeah, I think about sort of like the sort of voiceless, sort of trapped in situations, like how, and then women all around the world who, we would say sort of violently like extricate themselves from situations, and they didn't do it the right way.
Yeah.
Maybe they killed the partner who beat them for, what?
Yeah, no.
Those are real stories.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying, it's just like, well, they are losing their life. What I'm not a judge or a jury. I just think those are sad situations layered on.
But
sad
I mean, I
situations.
think very much when you bring up domestic abuse, certainly not here at Commons, but you hear just heartbreaking stories of women who have gone to their church, to their pastor.
Yes.
This is what's happening in my home, and they're like,
Yeah.
well, you just have to love your husband and you have to support him, and just this idea that story is not being heard. People are not taking it seriously.
Right.
And we're actually contributing to more suffering, more violence, more oppression by telling people to play by the rules and wait their turn. I mean, it's heartbreaking. It's tragic to think of those examples that
Yeah.
are still happening
Right.
in churches.
Right. I also think a little bit about the kinds of people that we really preference for leadership.
Right.
And we love a really educated, I mean, I'm quite educated, you're quite educated. And we really love that person and we really elevate that person. But there's some really interesting data around a diversity of a team, and especially in politics, that if you can get people who are from more working class working with those who have these PhDs and whatever, that you end up with a system that's much more tailored and careful for all people. But we love to sort of elevate a certain sort of leader, but then we end up with, again, this meritocracy. If we did it, everyone else can do it, rather than attention to the fact that there are real complicated systemic limitations to how we've set up our world.
And I think it's a really interesting point, certainly because we're becoming more aware of some of those systemic limitations that certain people face.
Yeah.
Basically anybody who's not me, right? Straight, white guy. And those things compound on each other. But I am continually fascinated by, first of all, the research that's out there, but second of all, my own experience as someone who leads a staff and a team, the understanding that you can approach building a team with two different ways. You can think about, how do we have the best individuals that have the most education, the most experience, check the most boxes on our team. Or you can think about, how does a team actually function together? And to realize that because of some of the structural imbalances in the world, if I wanted to hire a team of people who check the most boxes, probably the majority of those people would be white men.
Totally.
Right? Because they would have had all the opportunities to fill all the things on their CV to fill the boxes.
Exactly.
But would our team be not just as well-rounded, would we be as effective?
Oh, creative. Yeah.
Would we be able to speak to the broad audience that we do? Of course not. It's absurd to even think that as a team we would be as effective that way. So to sort of understand that, not just in the literature, but even as a team, as we put these things together, that the more voices we add to the table who check less boxes as an individual, but check more boxes that are missing around the table, you end up with a stronger organization.
Right.
And I think that's the thing that sort of is coming to be understood in the HR world and all these things. That a team that functions together, works together, complements each other, is not just more fair, it's more effective than a team of a bunch of rock stars who just want to do their own thing and pad their own CV.
Right.
But I think that's one of the things that even a story like this actually starts to speak into on a very practical level. How do you do hiring? How do you think about teams? How do you think about the people that you work with?
Think about the person here and think about the person there.
And what is that person going to show you? Because they're going to have a different way to the goal.
Right.
And it's not going to be as... I don't know what the language is, but it's not going to be as socially palatable.
Right.
But in the end, you're going to get somewhere you never would have got otherwise.
Yeah, the work is worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then to obviously in the story, to see Jesus prioritize her experience and her need, not the ways that she goes about asking for what she needs, I thought was really significant. And the part I read back onto that was that actually, if we're paying attention, now we realize that all of the things that Jairus did, the coming up and bowing before Jesus, they didn't mean anything to Jesus.
Yeah.
They meant something to us as readers.
Right.
We're like, oh, look how nice this guy. Jesus didn't care at all.
Right.
He just heard, oh, your daughter's sick.
Right.
I'll go with you.
Right, yeah.
All the rest of it was show
however
for
you
the
approach
audience.
me is fine.
Exactly.
Just approach me.
Yeah. Which is, that's good stuff.
That is good stuff. That'll preach. I did have another thought as you were talking, and I think I lost it.
About diversity, team.
Yeah, that's not worth it.
All right.
That's good. I liked your point. It's good. Gold star. So, I mean, we're wrapping up. In closing, what do you want to touch on? I mean, done a good exploration of the reversals, honor, shame, the battery image.
I mean, I think the biggest thing for me is, do we have a theological imagination to ask those characters in the story, where do we see them around us all the time?
Yeah.
So, do we look at the Mi'kmaq in Nova Scotia and we say, well, you've got to file your, application for this and you got to do this. And do we recognize that that's not always going to be heard in the context of the systems that are around us? Yeah. And do we have room for that? Yeah. Even if it makes us uncomfortable when people don't follow the rules. Right. Like you said, domestic violence situations. I'm quite inspired. I mean, there's a number of particularly Nigerian women in the community here, and following their social media and reading so much about SARS. Like, I've never even heard of the special armed robbery section of the Nigerian police.
A podcast came up in, again, like one of my news podcasts, and I was like, heard about it. Thanks, Commons community.
Exactly. But, like reading about these things and realize, sometimes the ways that we demand justice are not going to be, the ways that I've always been told, which is like you go and you vote and that's sort of the end of it. Right. That's not always accessible to everyone. And
again, I think it's too paying attention to the subtleties of these sort of forces that don't create a just world for everyone. Yes. I think those have been moments for me when I kind of think back to a moment in seminary, and I wasn't like a loud seminarian. I turned into one later. But there was a moment where I got really frustrated with a reference in a class, and I kept hearing, when a moment is just like, this is out of control, like, it was a couple stories, and the professor kept referring to the man as like talented, gifted in ministry, and every reference to women was like, she was beautiful. It was just, and I was like, is no one else hearing this? And I just saw my hand go up, and it was such an important moment for me to be like, it was so subtle, and nobody else noticed it, and I couldn't handle it anymore. And I said, I understand what you're trying to do with this story, but you're perpetuating a problem, and you continue to refer to women and their physical, by their physical attributes. And this poor professor was a very nice man. He just was like, oh. And to his credit, came up to me and really thanked me. But what was most important to me in that moment was like a woman in the washroom who was like, I didn't see it at all. Oh, wow. And how we need each other to be like, sometimes this stuff is subtle, but when you start pointing it out to each other, we should care about this. I know it's on a coast far away from us, but we should care about this. There's a reason that their cries are getting louder, and maybe they have what we think is really quite violent, but maybe the desperation needs to be listened to. So,
and also, I want to be told that I'm handsome sometimes.
Right? Equal treatment.
No, but you're absolutely right. Right. It's so important. And so I mean, that's a really significant moment.
Right. It was near the end of my very long MDiv, and it was like a kind of my own graduation in that moment. Was like, oh, this place did shape me. Even if that wasn't ever a direct thing, like my own action. It was a moment too where my body was like, no, here I go.
I'm doing it.
And I had a friend from Texas who would always sit by me. And we were like, I reminded him of a cousin. And he was like, Bobby, that's why I sit beside you. Like, you show me a perspective that I don't actually get from the guy teaching the class. And I was like, how great are you, Matt? That he knew I want more from this class than that guy's going to give me, so I'm going to sit by Bobby. I think she has something to say. But all that to say, we do this for each other. We hope our sermons do this for people, that not only by not spelling out the application for people, they can look around in their very real worlds and see, who is the woman who is here to teach me something that I shouldn't be paying attention to.
And maybe you are that woman. I mean, that's an equal part of it. Is you're in a place where people aren't listening to you, and you're trying to ask for something, and it's not being heard. Yeah. And sometimes it's okay
to get it.
Yeah, exactly.
To just get after it.
The language I used was to reach out and take what she needs from Jesus.
Oh, I love that language.
And I think it's a very interesting thing around to be speaking to an audience. Yeah. Certainly in the room, but now online, and realizing that I probably,
Yeah.
for most of us at Commons, we're gyrus. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, our salvation is bound up in our choosing to wait and allow someone to go first. But not all of us, and not all in every moment, right?
Yeah.
Like for yourself, there are moments where you're the woman and no one's listening and you need to reach out and take what you need.
Yeah.
There are moments where you're the gyrus and you do have lots of opportunities and you need to hand them off to somebody else. And like having...
I mean, we're going to go over time, but your language around like he's still in danger of losing what he loves was still a really dignifying way. Because it could be like, screw that guy. Yeah, exactly. But then we like lose sight of our own stories and our own vulnerability. And that's what that line so beautifully did was like.
And actually, in that one, what I wanted to say was, what I was going for in that moment was realizing that, look, the honor shame culture that elevates him is actually part of what's hurting him.
Totally.
Because he's so honored. He's got so much place. Like we almost are conditioned not to see his pain in that.
Right.
And, this is what we're talking about all the time now with toxic masculinity, right? So because I'm a man, because I've got all this stuff, I'm not allowed to be like, guys, this week sucks and I'm really down right now and I'm having a tough time.
Because then you just you turn into a shit.
Exactly,
right?
I've
said shit a few times.
Because you're, when you're at the top, first of all, it feels weird to pour that stuff out.
Yeah.
But it's very lonely to keep up those pretenses and stuff. And Jesus, by elevating this woman, by allowing her to reach out and honoring the way that she does that, in some sense, he allows Jairus to be let go of all of the weight of needing to defend the fact that he needs some help. Right. It's okay. She needs help. You need help. Everyone needs help. That's why I'm here.
Yeah.
And just because, all the white men in the room, it's okay to be sad. It's okay to need help. It's okay for all of that. It's okay to ask for help.
Afraid that you could lose the things that you really love.
Exactly. All of that. So, and I mean, that's what these stories, again, going back to where we started, a socio-rhetorical reading to say what's going on in the society there. Why are these stories being juxtaposed in a particular way?
Right.
How do I get that as a basis for an author-centered hermeneutic? Right. Now, how do I add myself into the story? Right. Because our paradigms are different, our categories are different, our hierarchies are different, but we still have them all. Right? So how do we interrogate them today and how do we ask questions of them? So we're way over time here.
I am giving this after party 5 gold stars. But as we wrap up, what are you grateful for?
Actually, let me just say, Michael said people with disabilities face the same thing. And I think it's absolutely true. And this is what we're becoming aware of. Able-bodied persons, all kinds of things. Our sexual orientation, our gender, our wealth status, all of these things layer into it. Yeah. And the more awareness that we have to see other people's stories and to see our story, I think is it's a real gift to us that Jesus is offering and Mark is offering to us in this story. Yeah, so, okay. Yes. What are you grateful for? What am I grateful for?
I know what I'm grateful for.
I know. I was going to say, I'm putting my head back on.
I'm so grateful to live.
I don't think it goes like this, does it? No, I think
it goes however you want it to.
Yeah, it's true. This looks like a gold miner, something like that.
You're right.
Yeah, this is like cowboy.
You do have 2 costumes in one there.
True, cowboy, and this is like San Francisco gold miner.
You need to block out some teeth.
That's right.
Okay, I feel really grateful, honestly, just for the play of this moment of Halloween. I like Halloween. It's on Saturday. I hope I get a few trick-or-treaters.
Hope you do too.
And I'm excited to live
I like the fact, I'm grateful for the fact that we can move from, I think, a fairly serious conversation to the playfulness of wearing huge hats in our studio here at Commons. I'm going to take
at least 65% of the credit on that.
Oh, I think probably more than that. I scrounged through the lost and found here at the church. So, but I am actually not joking. I am grateful for the fact that, I think there's a real beauty in that Christian story, that it's able to...
I thought you were going to say Halloween.
Well, yeah, that too. But it's able to reach into these really significant, challenging moments of who we are. But it's also like there's a deep joy in recognizing that and realizing the way that God comes to you and celebrating that and having a little fun on the other side. So that's what I'm grateful for.
That's it. I also loved an earlier comment when Ashley told us to take our hats off. And I think Greg was like, all I can see is their mouths moving and hatch. So that was a good joke.
There you go. That's all you can see now, Tim. All right. Thanks everybody. Have a great night. We'll see you back here next Tuesday.
By the way,
Happy Happy Halloween, yes. And Backstory starts next week.
Oh, that's huge.
Yeah.
That's huge.
So Scott's teaching that. It's our intro to reading the Bible through the lens of Jesus 4-week course. It's on Tuesday night, so you'll have to skip the after party, but it'll be worth it.
You can always watch the
Yeah, it's true.
The after party.
After party is
the link is always on YouTube. We should have music.